how to live. So there's probably some truth in all of those remarks. Before we get into our study of Ecclesiastes, if it's a book that's going to teach us how to live, how do we square that with the way we are living in these days? Do we need any biblical instruction on how to live in these days? So I got to thinking about some of the problems that we face in these days, that at least when I was young, we didn't seem to have these kind of problems. What are some vexing things in your mind, and as you read the paper or as you see the news, what are some vexing things that you really don't like to hear about or see about, that maybe 50 or 60 years ago people wouldn't have even thought of some of those things? I like Western stories where all the bad guys are people that steal your cows or rob a stagecoach or something, and then somebody goes after them and puts them in jail or shoots them or something. But our today's life is so much more complex than that. What are some of the things that are ailing in this age and in our present day society that are troublesome to you and dangerous maybe to a lot of us? Anybody like to speak to that? How about this last business that Planned Parenthood is accused of doing, using aborted baby parts to sell them to chemical companies or somebody? Yes.
Pastor Ryan, I heard on the radio back many cases, there was things that were going on, they were doing those sort of things, so it's nothing new. It's just that they hushed it because it was politically incorrect.
Okay.
Baby brains were most valuable. They were selling for $20 a pound then, because it was the parts of it were used for expensive face creams for ladies.
Okay. So.
And that just about made me sick then, so it's no surprise now that
Yes.
they're continuing to do that.
The enemy of our souls is finding more and more ways to exhibit who he is and what he wants to do in the human family. What else is ailing in our society? Did you happen to see this? I think just a couple days ago, there was, not a real young person, but certainly not old people. It was a man and used to be his wife, I thought, and they were just standing before the microphone, holding hands. They were separating, and the impression they were giving was that marriage is not a permanent thing anyway. So he has a job in one place and I have a job in another place, so we're just separating, we're dissolving this marriage. Now that sounds fairly simple, and yet when you look at what Scripture it violates, when it talks about what a family is and should be, then you see it's treating very carelessly something that God has ordained. What else in this society is troubling to you?
Pastor, yesterday I was here when we get married, and He said, when you get married, love is like your wedding ring. It's a never ending.
Yes, yes.
It really affected.
So how could this man and lady that we saw on TV just, they were holding hands, but they were separating?
But they don't have God in them. They can't to be like that.
Yeah. But the institutions that God has created are in trouble in these days. Anybody else have anything that you hear about or read about that is very troublesome to you?
Morality, I mean, the lack of morality and decay in our society.
Yes.
We were just talking about some of the TV shows with a guy at work just recently, and when we were growing up, you know, the old McHale's Navy and Green Acres and, you know, some of them old Lucille Ball, they all were funny back then, but yet there was no sex and violence and things like that in them, but nowadays that just doesn't sell, I guess.
Mm-hmm. When I was a boy, we had no TV and not a whole lot of radio. But the main criminal in our area over in the Thumb was John Dillinger. What did John Dillinger do? Oh, he robbed banks, and he stole a car if he needed it. And my uncle used to say he likes the new Mercury car. Mercury, that would have been about 1939 when they first came out. And he had this car because it was supposedly so fast. But he was making the headlines. What was he doing? Robbing something or someone. That was criminal activity in those days. What's criminal activity in these days?
It's about everything.
How about this boy? Is he 12 years old now? He took the life of somebody younger. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay. Oh, whatever would possess a boy that age to take the life of someone else?
He was striking out against his mom and dad, but he was being abused.
Oh, yes, okay. So there is that. There's erosion of the family unit in many ways. And that's why this man and this lady can just walk away from each other and think nothing of it. Yes?
There was an absence of love.
I'm sorry?
I said there was an absence of love.
Yes,
in the
yes, yes.
The thing that bothers me is that the divorce rate is about the same in the church as it is in the world.
Okay.
And it just kind of bothers me that, the world looks on the church and they don't see a lot of difference.
Okay. Someone else have something? Okay, there is this erosion of the family in many different ways. How about this? This was on the news too, that somebody was being, maybe even breaking the law. What was he doing? He was in the business of tattooing children. Now, why would a person want to do that kind of thing? Because they don't really care for other people, almost no matter what age they are. How about these freeway shootings? Why would somebody just want to shoot at a car coming down the road, someone that they've never seen or probably never will see, but shoot at their car anyway? Does that make any kind of sense?
No, but they might get a thrill out of it. And that's what they're doing it for, is a thrill.
Okay. So you think there's a thrill aspect of,
I don't think, but they might think that.
okay? How about other ways of taking advantage of someone else? Maybe their money, for example. Like I mentioned earlier, in John Dillinger's day was, well, take your gun and go to a bank or a store or something and give me that money and out you go. Are there other ways of stealing someone's money in these days?
Fraud, computer fraud.
I'm sorry?
Computer fraud?
Yes, yes. Yes, we heard about that just the other day. What happens if somebody, is there any way they can take your credit card and do something criminal about that? What do they do with your credit card?
Need LifeLock.
And I heard the other day about some way they can, I don't know enough about these electronic things to get this right, but they're working on ways to, well, just to steal whatever is on your credit card to make use of it.
They can scan them so that they can get your number and use your credit card.
Yes,
Skimmers. When you skim them through whatever reader, there's a device that they can put in them so that the criminal can get your credit card numbers and then use them off the skimmers that they.
okay,
But they don't even have to put them in the machine anymore. If you put them in a machine to use them, somebody next to you can get that number off of them and not even watch it.
so what does all this say to us? If we say we're trying to live the Christian life, and we have to deal with this kind of a world, what's that say to us?
People don't care about the law.
So he's saying we're in overtime on everybody.
Says in the last days, there'll be lawlessness.
Yes, and that's kind of the way I feel about some of these things, that these are characteristics of what the Bible calls the last days. Yes, Bible.
Says in the last days, people will call evil good.
Yes, and good evil.
Yes.
Yes,
Abortion. Homosexuality.
yes,
It's accepted as the norm and it's okay in our society.
yes. So the days we live in can be pretty precarious for people that are trying to do the right thing. That's very troubling for me. I have a little great-grandson that's having a little trouble in school. He was with a couple of, well, I wouldn't call them friends, but other young people, and they broke into the school, one school, and took something. So now, the one that was kind of engineering that, well, he's in pretty deep trouble with the law. But my little great-grandson is maybe facing expulsion from the school that he went to. So I went down to see him a week or so ago, and I put my arm around him, and I told him that I loved him, and that he was going to grow up to be a fine man. he's been doing good work in school. He's been on the honor roll. And I don't know how these kind of things happen. But I know that there are influences everywhere in life that want to push us in directions that the Bible and the good Lord says we ought to go. We ought not to go in those directions. So I'm thankful for the Lord's Word. Anything on an international scale that is very troubling to you?
All the refugees overseas trying to leave the war-torn country that they're in.
Yes. Most of those refugees are coming from Syria.
That's what we're told they're coming from. But if you look at most of the pictures, somebody commented that you have women and children in the front, the small children, then you look behind and it's all young men of military age. So I think that it's a way of getting soldiers that they want into other countries. I
And
think it's done on purpose, and it is not that they're refugees, they're being deliberately shipped to other countries so that they can do what they want to do to further the Islamic ends of dominating the world.
And there's been a civil war in Syria for how long now? Well, several years. That the head of the country, the president or whatever they call him, Assad, there's a whole group of Syrian, a lot of them, that want to just get him out of power. And that has caused that civil war. And now the fruit of that is the rise of radical Islamic power. And it's just about ruining the whole country of Syria. Yes.
Yeah, ISIS owns 70%, controls 70% of the oil in Syria, and quite a bit in Iraq. 12 million a month they're making.
Yes. And
Recognition.
yes, and they have enriched themselves in that way with the oil, and I think with other ways too. It's hard to imagine a group of people that are so determined to have their way, no matter what it costs. If you could just imagine what would come into people's minds that if they have some prisoners from an opposing country, cut their heads off so it's on television and it goes all over the world. This is what happens when you resist these people. And you think about that and you see this is satanic, as clear and as strong as it can be. So that's something that confronts the world. And what do we do as a nation about things like that? Yes.
It reminds me of the Fort Hood shooter and how we made accommodations for him for his religious freedoms and rights while he was in prison. And yet this clerk in Kentucky, they couldn't make an accommodation for her Christianity, for her faith and her belief in our God. You know, it takes me back to in the end days, they will call good evil. And that's what they're doing. They're looking at Christianity. A lot of people in the world, even in our own country, look at Christianity just like Mike Huckabee said, it's the criminalization of Christianity, what they're doing to her. And that's exactly what's happening. People, I mean, even in my own family, I have a daughter who is a liberal, and she doesn't believe that the Bible is God's word. I mean, she wants to believe parts of it, but she won't believe all of it. And that's what's happening in the world. The people are in error because they do not know the word of God, nor the power of God.
Yes. And if you want to put a cross, for example, on any kind of public building or area, then you're going to be in trouble in that way too. So anyway, those are some of the characteristics of the age in which we're living. And it's a threat to the, not just Christian religion, but when Christian religion decays, everything else becomes permissible.
That's right.
And that's, well, what does Ecclesiastes have to say about things like that? You might want to have your Bible handy. And we want to look at some of the things that Ecclesiastes has to say. We're going to look at chapter 2 first. Now, Ecclesiastes, most Bible scholars say was written by King Solomon, who had a lot of wisdom. He didn't do everything right in his personal life, but he was a very wise man. So we're at chapter 2 and verse 10. Ecclesiastes 2, 10. We'll read 10 and 11. This is what it says. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. Now, the book of Ecclesiastes is going to give us a picture of some things in life that we might strive for, but they're not worth striving after. There are some phrases here that we need to make note of. In verse 11, and indeed all was vanity. What does vanity mean in Ecclesiastes? Well, it means literally a vapor or a fog, pointless, loss of one's way. In other words, those are descriptive words that vanity in Ecclesiastes means. Another one is fear, and we will come across that in several times. Fear of the Lord. Well, is the Lord someone to be fearful of? But it means, in Ecclesiastes and other places in the Bible, trust, obey, and honor. So when Ecclesiastes, we read in there about the fear of the Lord, that's what he's talking about. Not to be terrified of the Lord or run from his presence, but to recognize that he is one to be trusted, obeyed, and honored. There's another phrase that pops up every little while, and let's see, I think I just read that. There was no prophet under the sun. Under the sun has a peculiar meaning in Ecclesiastes. It means how things appear without reference to God. In other words, the earth and everything that pertains to it, that's under the sun, but not with a mind to the Creator, God, who gave all of this to us. So he's saying that when our thinking narrows to what's very visible, or something you can do with your hands, work, or nature. I said to my wife this morning on the way up here, this is a miracle. You people that have farming in your background or even present, what is the miracle that the earth will produce a field of corn year after year after year after year for how many years? Hundreds. This has been going on for ever since biblical days, that the earth will produce crops. Well, I know there's sunshine and rain that's important and necessary, and in these days it's fertilizer, but still that plain old dirt there, you have to help it a little bit, but it'll produce a crop. And we can buy all these beautiful corn crops. And another crop that's green as can be, I still don't know what it is. Might be soybeans or something. But crops every year. But anyway, this expression, under the sun, that's how things appear without necessarily pointing to God. Then there's another word that is used, and that's eternity. And there's a verse we'll maybe read it here sometime that says that he has put eternity in our hearts. And that means a desire to know God and know him thoroughly. A little bit like that biblical character, was it Moses, who said, I want to see your face. And the Lord says, you can't see my face. There's too much of me for you to see my face. But anyway, the writer of Ecclesiastes says that the Lord has put eternity in our hearts. Now that's whether we want to acknowledge that or not. That's what the Lord has done. But here and there in the book of Ecclesiastes, we find some words that really make sense in today's world as well as any other time. Verse 13, we're still in chapter 2, and here he says, then I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. So you'll find that through the book of Ecclesiastes, this matter of wisdom and how precious that is. Okay, but he is still struggling with things. So look at verse 17, 18, and 19. Chapter 2. Therefore, I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was grievous to me. Remember what under the sun is. It's all of this stuff around us without the presence of God anywhere around. Was grievous to me, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind. What might grasping for the wind mean? Exactly, that's something you can't catch. If you go out and you try to catch it and twist it, you're not going to do it. And so that's what he says, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind. Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Now just think now how this compares with a lot of thinking in today's world. Thank you. I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Well, is that a terrible thing? Leave your inheritance to your children? He is thinking all of these things in terms of the what you would call the natural man. Verse 19, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Talking about people that might receive as an inheritance what he has worked real hard to get. Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. So in this book that we're reading, the author gives us a picture of life on earth apart from the presence and the will of God. He's not saying that everything that he does with his hands is bad, but he's putting it kind of in the context of being apart from God, and apart from God's will. And you know, we get in trouble when we divorce this life and everything in it from the Lord, whether we're talking about marriage, whether we're talking about bringing up children, we're talking about work, what kind of work we're going to give ourselves to. That's all part of what he is getting at. Now, let's go to verse 26, still in 2nd chapter. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight, but to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Okay, it says here, for God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner, he gives the work of gathering and collecting. Okay, sinners have to work for a living, we'll say. And if that's all you're doing in life, without serving God and giving even the work of your hands to the Lord, that's what he's saying is vanity and grasping for the wind. That's why this person in the previous verse said, all this that I'm working so hard to get, I'm going to have to leave to someone else. And he didn't really want to do that, but he couldn't use it all up himself either. So now in this verse, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. Okay. Now let's go to chapter 3 and verses 9 through 11. For what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to end. Okay. He's put eternity in the hearts of people. In many cases, that's there, but we cover it all up with the business of life. How often do you read, if you read the obituaries in the Grand Rapids Press or any paper, and the family refers to the death of a loved one, what is oftentimes their remark? Gone to be with Jesus. Yeah. Even in many cases when they haven't been faithful church people or God-loving people on earth. So, writer to Ecclesiastes is saying God has put eternity in our hearts. Whether everyone wants to acknowledge that or not, it's there. God has put it there. Okay, some summary verses in chapter 3. This is verses 14 and 15. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it that men should fear before him. And remember, fear isn't terror, but it's honoring and giving full credit to God for what he has done. That which has already been and what it is to be has already been, and God requires an account of the past. So every little while, this writer of Ecclesiastes puts things into what he is writing about that are applicable in every generation and in every age. And it's the matter of honoring and serving the Lord, which is what we're supposed to be doing. So, the human race, it has always had people that are, you'll say, hardworking. We saw this program on television just this last week about Mr. Disney, Walt Disney, and how he built his, you could almost call it an empire, but started out very small, and there were a lot of handicaps and problems, and sometimes family or corporate people that he disagreed with. It wasn't a happy life for him until maybe near the end of it. But there is such a thing, and this is what the writer to Ecclesiastes is saying. He's saying that these people that do not fear God, they're going to be collectors and gatherers. In other words, they're going to have to work for a living. It can be farming or business or banking or whatever, and he's going to have problems. one kind or another, yes.
It's where they find their sense of purpose, because they do not have God, they do not have God's purpose. So their own fulfillment is to gather,
Yes.
to work, to
And-
achieve.
If we don't have God in our vision, that's what we become,
Yes.
collectors and gatherers. And that's where this writer to Ecclesiastes, he's right on the mark when he describes the activity of the human race.
I think a lot of them have, more money equals more happiness. More fame is more happiness, but it doesn't work that way. As we find with a lot of people.
Yes.
In Ecclesiastes 4:4, it says, "And I saw that all labor and all achievement spring from man's envy of his neighbor. This too is meaningless and chasing after the wind."
Okay.
I believe we're supposed to do all our work to like unto the glory of the Lord. Like we do, yeah.
We are, there is a way of life on planet Earth where you can ignore God, His presence and His gifts and His promises. You can ignore all of that, and you can work in a factory or a farm or a bank or in Washington all of a lifetime, and you can be collecting and gathering in ecclesiastical terms and miss or keep God out of your life forever. Yes.
I just, we just, in our Sunday school class, we just went over what sin is. And when Jesus was led into the desert to be tempted by Satan, every temptation that he threw at Jesus was to get Jesus to use his attributes apart from God. The temptation was to live separate from God.
Yes.
And that's the temptation that Satan gives to all of us. He wants all of us to live separate from God. And we do that when we live for ourselves
Yes.
and not for God.
And we become collectors and gatherers. In other words, you can have a business or anything and get rich as can be, but you can do some of those things and leave God out of it. But there's a price to pay. So let's look at, we're in chapter 8 now. Chapter 8 and verse 12. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before Him. Remember now, it's not being terrified of God, it's honoring Him. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. In other words, he doesn't honor God. Well, what's God doing in these days that is worthy of our honor and our trust and our belief in Him?
Providing rain and sunshine for grow crops.
Yes, He is. And that in itself is a beautiful thing, isn't it?
I still haven't figured out how one grain of corn or wheat will have head of wheat and ear corn with many kernels on it.
Yeah. I've thought about that. The mystery of it baffles me yet. I just know that it was God's doing. Well, in a little different way, Jesus said, I will build my church. Well, who is the church anyway? What is the church?
The body of Christ.
These people that the ecclesiastical writer is talking about, those who fear, and that means to honor and give glory and obedience to God. That's who they are. They're always have been there. This is the Light and Life paper of our church. That's was right there out on our rack, magazine rack. And it tells about, this is the one that tells about the recent general conference of our church. And it tells about what our church is trying to do, both in this country and around the world. This is, they call it Pulse magazine, mission magazine of our church. And this tells about the many countries around the world where we have missionary activity, where we have active mission work, and it's in many places around the world. Are we the only ones? No. Other churches are there. This is the War Cry, the magazine from the Salvation Army. Salvation Army is everywhere in the world. That started from devout followers of John Wesley and Methodism early on. But they are everywhere in the world. And I read in one magazine, I don't know if it was this one, but it said in the land of India now. We just read shortly ago that they have said the official religion of India is Hinduism. And yet I read, I don't know if it was in this War Cry or which one it was, but 200,000 people of India are turning Christian in a relatively small period of time. I'm not saying it was a month or 2 months, but that's what's happening in India. This Salvation Army has been in every country. They recently had their 150th anniversary. Where did they celebrate it? Right over in this new building for big gatherings in London, where it started out. Just imagine now, 150 years ago, someone said, we need an organization that is not a church that's in one building in one city, but where we go everywhere there is need. And they have been doing this for 150 years, and they're doing more of it now than ever before in their history. So when, there's an article, I don't know if I can find it quickly here. Anyway, it's oh yes, here it is. This was in Light and Life. They had a luncheon there. The keynote address came from the Wesleyan Church General Superintendent Joanne Lyon. And I remember reading about her in the Grand Rapids Press. So now she's the superintendent of the whole Wesleyan denomination, who expressed solidarity with her Free Methodist hostesses. We share a great history together, she says. We share a great theology together. To me, there is no difference. God is using all of us. Before becoming the first woman to lead the Wesleyan Church, Joanne Lyon founded World Hope International, her denomination's official relief and development partner. So when the Bible says God is building His church, I know He is. I can read it, and it's in today's world, and it's only a part of it that we as Free Methodists or Wesleyans are. But God is building His church, and we are part of it. What an honor that is. You just can't do any better than that. All right. Okay, and we're in verse 12 now. Okay. Verse 6, chapter 12, chapter 12, verse 6. Before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well, when the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Then where is this? The conclusion that he comes to. This is verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. So the writer of Ecclesiastes covers a lot of ground, doesn't he? He covers ground that you could apply to the business world, to the military world, to the world that we live in, with the problems that we're facing. And he's saying to us, God is going to weigh the work of our hands and the feelings in our hearts and the best use of our mind. And God is saying it's not just a matter of gathering, in other words, gathering wealth, so to speak, but it's a matter of reverencing God and doing his will and his work. And that's what we're called to do. And I'm glad God is building his church, and he's not going to give up on that. It will take different forms and in different shapes and sometimes different teachings, but in and through it all, God is building his church. Anybody else, anything you'd like to add? Yes?
What I get out of Ecclesiastes is life has no meaning without God.
I couldn't.
I said, what I got from this scripture here is life has no meaning without God.
Exactly. And that's what he is bringing to us through the whole book. We can gather, we can collect, and we can do all that. Still, when you come down to either the end of your life or the end of history, you'll find that an awful lot of that has very little meaning. And it's what we have done with regard to God. And he'll still give us work to do. No question about that. Oh, and another thing that I should have mentioned. The writer is saying we are to be content with, you don't have to be a billionaire, in other words. Be content with the work of your hands or the work of your mind, and be satisfied with that, and that's enough. But he's not saying striving after wealth or power are the things that we really should be working for. he says, that's not what we need. But because God has set eternity in our hearts, that's where we should be. Well, thank you for listening. I'm old enough now that my thoughts get kind of scattered and go everywhere, and sometimes nowhere. Anyway, thank you for listening.